A group of racist police officers storm into a diner, targeting a heavy-set black man sitting quietly at his table. Their taunts and intimidation escalate, unaware they've cornered a former Marine with unmatched combat training. As tensions boil over, the man's calm demeanor begins to crack, revealing a hidden strength the officers never saw coming. What happens next will leave you speechless. Don't miss this gripping story. Subscribe and like our YouTube channel to uncover the full truth. The diner buzzed with a low hum of chatter, clinking utensils, and sizzling grills. It was a typical afternoon, with locals stopping in for a quick bite. At a corner booth, a black man, stocky and broad-shouldered, sat quietly, savoring his meal. His calm demeanor and neatly trimmed beard gave him an approachable air, but his posture suggested a man accustomed to discipline. His name was Marcus, a former Marine, though he rarely spoke of his military past. At the counter, a group of 6 white police officers in black uniforms gathered, their laughter a little too loud, their glances a little too frequent. Their leader, Officer Trent, leaned against the counter, his eyes narrowing as he observed Marcus. Trent, known for his brazen attitude and unchecked aggression, found an easy target in the man sitting alone. To Trent, Marcus was an opportunity to assert dominance, a distraction from the monotony of the day. Trent's comments started as muttered jabs to his colleagues, but as his confidence grew, his voice carried across the diner. Marcus, focused on his meal, ignored the escalating provocations. His restraint only fueled Trent's arrogance. Trent pushed back from the counter, signaling to his officers. They moved as a unit, approaching Marcus with a swagger that reeked of entitlement. The tension in the diner thickened as the officers surrounded Marcus's booth. Conversations hushed, and diners exchanged uneasy glances. Trent's tone was sharp, his words laced with condescension as he questioned Marcus's presence. Marcus met Trent's gaze, his eyes calm but unyielding. He answered briefly, his voice measured, betraying no hint of the anger simmering beneath the surface. Trent's probing escalated into veiled accusations. He insinuated that Marcus was causing trouble, his words dripping with hostility. Marcus remained composed, his hands resting on the table, his posture steady. The officer's body language grew more aggressive, their stances tightening as Trent's words inflamed the situation. A waitress, barely out of her teens, hesitated near the kitchen door, her eyes darting between Marcus and the officers. She knew better than to intervene but couldn't look away. The diner's manager, a middle-aged man with a nervous demeanor, stepped forward, his voice trembling as he tried to defuse the situation. Trent waved him off with a dismissive hand, his focus locked on Marcus. One of the officers, younger and visibly uncomfortable, shifted his weight from foot to foot. He glanced at Trent, then at Marcus, uncertainty clouding his features. His hesitation didn't go unnoticed by Marcus, who catalogued every movement, every potential threat. Marcus had spent years in combat zones, where reading a situation could mean the difference between life and death. This was no different. Trent's hand hovered near his baton, a subtle but deliberate show of power. The air crackled with unspoken threats, the tension coiling tighter with every passing second. Marcus's jaw clenched imperceptibly. He could feel the weight of the diner's stares, the unspoken plea for him to avoid escalation. But he also knew that Trent wouldn't back down without a show of force. As Trent's patience wore thin, he barked an order, demanding Marcus stand and produce identification. The diner fell into a heavy silence. Marcus didn't move immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath, his mind calculating the risks and outcomes of every possible action. He knew compliance wouldn't guarantee safety, but resistance would ignite the powder keg. With deliberate slowness, Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his ID. He placed it on the table and slid it toward Trent. Trent snatched it up, his eyes scanning the card. When he saw the insignia denoting Marcus's status as a decorated Marine, his smirk faltered, replaced by a sneer. Instead of retreating, Trent's hostility intensified. He tossed the ID back onto the table, muttering something about tough guys who think they're above the law. Marcus's restraint was a thread stretched thin. His muscles coiled, ready for the explosion he knew was coming. The younger officer shifted again, his discomfort growing palpable. He opened his mouth as if to speak but was silenced by a sharp glare from Trent. The breaking point came when Trent reached for Marcus's plate, tipping it onto the floor in a show of dominance. The crash of the ceramic plate echoed through the diner, gasps rippling through the onlookers. Marcus rose slowly, his imposing frame towering over Trent. His eyes locked on Trent's, unblinking and cold. Before Trent could react, Marcus spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. He pointed out the misconduct, his words precise and cutting. The younger officer's eyes widened as Marcus's tone shifted, revealing the calculated presence of a leader. Trent bristled, his authority challenged in front of his peers and the crowd. One of Trent's officers, emboldened by the growing tension, reached for Marcus. In an instant, Marcus's training took over. His movements were swift and deliberate, disarming the officer with a precision that left no room for retaliation. The officer stumbled back, stunned, as Marcus's gaze returned to Trent. The dog that had been lying quietly under Marcus's table now rose, its stance protective and its growl a low menacing rumble. Trent's bravado wavered as the realization of his miscalculation began to sink in. Marcus stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression, but his posture remained firm, a silent warning that any further action would not end well. The diner erupted into chaos as more officers rushed in, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Marcus stayed calm, guiding his dog to his side as he backed toward the exit. The diners, emboldened by Marcus's defiance, began recording the scene with their phones, their murmurs growing into shouts of protest. As Marcus exited the diner, the tension reached its peak. Trent shouted after him, his words a mix of threats and frustration. Marcus didn't look back. He knew this was just the beginning, that Trent and his men wouldn't let the humiliation go unanswered. But Marcus was prepared. He had faced worse adversaries and knew the importance of staying one step ahead. Outside, Marcus paused, his dog standing alert beside him. He scanned the street, his mind already formulating a plan. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, his voice calm but resolute as he explained the situation to a trusted ally. This was no longer just about him. It was about sending a message that the abuse of power wouldn't go unchecked. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the diner, the stage was set for the battle to come. Marcus walked away, his step steady, his resolve unshaken. Inside, the officers regrouped, their pride bruised but their determination to assert control burning brighter than ever. The conflict had been ignited, and neither side was willing to back down. As the dust from the diner confrontation began to settle, the ripple effects spread rapidly. Inside the police precinct, Officer Trent stormed into the break room, slamming his fist onto the table. His face was flushed with anger, the humiliation from Marcus's calm defiance eating at his pride. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that Trent's frustration was about to turn into something dangerous. Trent paced, his words dripping with venom as he recounted the events at the diner to his inner circle. He painted Marcus as an arrogant troublemaker who needed to be put in his place. His loyalists nodded in agreement, their faces hardening with shared indignation. Among them was Officer Reed, a man known for his quick temper and blind loyalty to Trent. Reed spoke up, his voice sharp as he suggested a plan to corner Marcus and show him who held the real power. But not everyone in the room shared their enthusiasm. Officer Daniels, one of the younger members of the group, sat silently in the corner. The tension in the air pressed against him like a weight. He had been at the diner and witnessed the entire encounter. Unlike Trent and Reed, Daniels couldn't shake the image of Marcus's calm strength and the way he had defused the situation without violence. A seed of doubt had taken root in his mind, though he dared not voice it in the presence of his colleagues. Meanwhile, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, reviewing his next steps. His phone buzzed with messages from concerned friends and community members who had seen the videos circulating online. The footage from the diner had gone viral, sparking outrage and conversations about racial profiling and abuse of power. Marcus's military instincts told him this was far from over. He made a call to an old friend, a journalist named Carla, whose investigative reporting had brought down corrupt figures in the past. He briefed her on the incident, knowing that her involvement could shine a spotlight on Trent and his team. Carla wasted no time. She began digging into Trent's history, uncovering a trail of complaints and misconduct reports that had been buried under bureaucracy. As she pieced together the evidence, her determination grew. She knew this wasn't just about Marcus. It was about exposing a pattern of systemic abuse that had gone unchecked for too long. Back at the precinct, Trent's plans began to take shape. He called a meeting with his loyalists, laying out a strategy to discredit Marcus and shift the narrative in their favor. They would frame him as a dangerous agitator with a history of violence, using their connections to plant evidence and manipulate records. Reed volunteered to lead the effort, his eagerness fueled by a desire to prove his loyalty to Trent. As the officers dispersed, Daniels lingered behind, conflicted. He knew the plan was wrong, a gross abuse of power that would only escalate the situation. But fear kept him silent. He wrestled with his conscience, the weight of his uniform feeling heavier than ever. Carla's investigation unearthed a key piece of evidence, an internal memo from years ago that detailed a cover-up involving Trent and a similar incident of racial profiling. She contacted Marcus with the news, her excitement tempered by caution. They needed more concrete proof to ensure the story couldn't be dismissed as hearsay. Marcus suggested reaching out to community leaders and former colleagues who could vouch for his character and corroborate the narrative. As night fell, the tension escalated. Trent and Reed, emboldened by their plan, set their sights on Marcus's neighborhood. Under the guise of a routine patrol, they drove through the streets, their presence a calculated intimidation tactic. Marcus, watching from his window, recognized the game they were playing. He didn't react, knowing that any misstep could be used against him. Instead, he documented their movements, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Inside the patrol car, Reed's bravado masked a growing frustration. He expected Marcus to react, to give them an excuse to act. But Marcus's calm defiance only fueled his anger. Trent, sensing Reed's agitation, smirked. He enjoyed the control, the feeling of power that came with instilling fear. To him, this was a game he intended to win. Back at the precinct, Daniel's internal struggle reached a breaking point. He stayed late, sifting through files and records, searching for anything that could counter Trent's narrative. What he found shocked him, a pattern of falsified reports, doctored evidence, and coercion. Daniels realized the extent of the corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined. He copied the files onto a flash drive, his hands shaking with a mix of fear and determination. The next morning, Marcus met with Carla and a group of community leaders. Among them was Pastor Wright, a respected figure whose voice carried weight in the neighborhood. Wright listened intently as Marcus recounted the events, his expression grave. He pledged his support, vowing to rally the community and stand against the injustice. Carla presented the evidence she had gathered, including the memo and testimonials from others who had encountered Trent's abuses. The group strategized, deciding to hold a public forum to bring the issue into the open. Marcus, though reluctant to step into the spotlight, agreed to speak, knowing it was necessary to challenge the narrative Trent was building. Word of the forum spread quickly, reaching the precinct. Trent's anger boiled over as he realized his plan to discredit Marcus was losing ground. He doubled down, ordering Reed to escalate their efforts. Reed, eager to prove himself, suggested a direct confrontation at the forum. Trent agreed, his desire for control blinding him to the consequences. The stage was set for a clash that neither side could avoid. As the day of the forum approached, tensions reached a fever pitch. Marcus prepared himself, drawing on his military training to stay focused and composed. Carla worked tirelessly to ensure the evidence was airtight, knowing the stakes were higher than ever. Daniels, with the flash drive in his pocket, faced a choice: remain silent or step forward and risk everything to expose the truth. The threads of conflict tightened, pulling everyone toward an inevitable reckoning. The lines were drawn, the players in position, and the battle for justice was about to begin. The forum's announcement sent ripples through the community, drawing attention from supporters and skeptics alike. As the date approached, tensions mounted on all sides. Marcus continued to prepare with Pastor Wright and Carla, their strategy hinging on presenting undeniable evidence to challenge Trent's narrative. But within the precinct, Trent and his loyalists plotted their counterattack, determined to control the narrative and silence dissent. Trent called a late-night meeting with his inner circle. His tone was sharp, his instructions precise. They would use the forum to discredit Marcus publicly, planting agitators in the crowd to disrupt the event and create chaos. Reed, eager to prove himself once again, volunteered to lead the effort, his frustration from their previous failures fueling his determination. The younger officers exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to voice dissent. Meanwhile, Daniels wrestled with his decision. The flash drive containing damning evidence against Trent burned a hole in his pocket, a constant reminder of the stakes. He stayed late at the precinct, pacing in the dim light of his office as he replayed the diner incident in his mind. The fear of retaliation clashed with his growing conviction that he needed to act. Finally, he made a decision. He would attend the forum, armed with the evidence, but he kept his plan to himself. Carla worked tirelessly in the days leading up to the event. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates and tips from sources. One message stood out: an anonymous tip about Trent's connection to a higher-ranking official within the city. If true, it would expose a broader network of corruption, but verifying the claim required time they didn't have. She shared the lead with Marcus, who agreed to follow up after the forum. For now, their focus remained on the immediate challenge. The night of the forum arrived. The community center buzzed with energy as residents filled the hall, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. Marcus stood backstage, his broad shoulders taut with tension. Pastor Wright placed a reassuring hand on his arm, offering a few quiet words of encouragement. Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He knew the weight of the moment rested on his shoulders. Trent arrived late, flanked by Reed and a few other loyalists. Their presence drew murmurs from the crowd, the atmosphere growing heavier with their arrival. Trent's eyes scanned the room, his expression unreadable but his intent clear. He spotted Marcus near the stage and smirked, confident in his plan to dismantle the man's credibility. As the forum began, Carla took the stage first. She outlined the key points of her investigation, her words measured and deliberate. She presented evidence of Trent's misconduct, including testimonials and documented complaints. The audience reacted with murmurs of shock and indignation, their support for the cause visibly growing. Marcus followed, his voice steady but tinged with emotion as he recounted the events at the diner. He spoke of his military service, his commitment to the community, and the importance of accountability. His words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Trent's smirk faded, replaced by a tightening of his jaw. Reed signaled to the agitators planted in the audience. At first, their disruptions were subtle whispers, exaggerated scoffs, and dismissive laughter. But as Marcus continued, their tactics escalated. One man stood, shouting accusations meant to provoke a reaction. Marcus paused, his gaze steady as he addressed the man directly, diffusing the tension with calm authority. The agitators faltered, their efforts momentarily stifled. Daniel sat near the back, his pulse quickening as he watched the scene unfold. The flash drive felt heavy in his pocket, the decision to reveal its contents looming larger with each passing moment. He scanned the crowd, noting the mixture of genuine support and orchestrated chaos. When Carla introduced Pastor Wright, Daniels knew the time to act was drawing near. Pastor Wright's presence commanded the room. His voice carried a blend of warmth and conviction as he spoke of unity and justice. He called on the community to stand together against oppression, his words met with applause and cheers. But as the atmosphere shifted in favor of the speakers, Trent made his move. Trent stood, his voice cutting through the noise as he accused Marcus of fabricating the story for personal gain. He questioned Carla's credibility, dismissing her investigation as biased. The tension in the room spiked as Trent's loyalists joined in, their voices creating a cacophony of doubt. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides, but he held his ground, refusing to be baited. It was Daniels who broke the stalemate. Rising from his seat, he held up the flash drive, his voice firm but steady. He announced that he had evidence proving not only Marcus's account but also a pattern of corruption within the precinct. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Trent's expression shifted from confidence to panic, his hand tightening into a fist. Daniels approached the stage, his heart pounding as he handed the flash drive to Carla. She plugged it into her laptop, projecting its contents onto the screen behind her. The room erupted as files detailing falsified reports, coercion, and cover-ups appeared in stark detail. Gasps and murmurs of disbelief filled the air, the weight of the truth crashing down on everyone present. Trent's voice rose in protest, but it was drowned out by the crowd's growing outrage. Community members shouted demands for accountability, their voices rising in a unified chorus. Trent's loyalists shifted uncomfortably, their resolve wavering as the evidence mounted against them. Reed looked to Trent for guidance, but the leader's composure had crumbled. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. He called for calm, urging the crowd to focus on the path forward. His words carried the weight of his experience and conviction, restoring a semblance of order. Carla closed the presentation, emphasizing the need for immediate action to address the systemic issues exposed by the evidence. As the forum concluded, the atmosphere buzzed with a mixture of triumph and urgency. The community had seen the truth, and there was no going back. Trent and his loyalists retreated, their plans unraveling as the tide turned against them. Danielle's courage had shifted the narrative, and Marcus's steadfast leadership had united the community in their fight for justice. Outside the community center, Marcus and Carla stood together, the weight of the night settling over them. Pastor Wright joined them, his expression one of quiet determination. They knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time, they felt the momentum shifting in their favor. Together, they resolved to continue the fight, knowing that justice demanded nothing less. The fallout from the forum spread quickly, rippling through the precinct and the community. Officer Trent returned to the station in a fury, his carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of the exposed evidence. He stormed into the briefing room, slamming the door behind him. His loyalists, including Reed, gathered around him, their expressions a mix of confusion and anger. Trent's voice was sharp as he barked orders, instructing his officers to double down on their efforts to regain control of the narrative. They would paint Marcus and Carla as agitators, exploiting their connections to plant false reports and sow doubt about the evidence presented at the forum. Reed, always eager to prove his loyalty, volunteered to take the lead on this new offensive. The younger officers exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent, too intimidated to challenge Trent's authority. Meanwhile, Daniel's decision to step forward with the flash drive had shifted the balance of power. Though he felt a surge of relief at finally exposing the truth, he knew the consequences would be severe. His colleagues' glares followed him as he walked through the precinct. Whispers filled the air, carrying accusations of betrayal. Daniels tried to focus on the work ahead, but the hostility was impossible to ignore. Carla's phone didn't stop ringing. The forum had propelled her investigation into the spotlight, drawing attention from media outlets and advocacy groups. She worked tirelessly to keep the momentum alive, juggling interviews and tip-offs while coordinating with Marcus and Pastor Wright. The anonymous lead about Trent's ties to higher-level corruption continued to gnaw at her. She decided to pursue it, knowing that uncovering the full extent of the network could solidify their case. Marcus maintained a low profile, though he couldn't escape the weight of his growing role as a symbol of resistance. The community rallied around him, but the increased visibility brought new risks. He noticed unfamiliar cars parked on his street and strangers lingering near his home. His military instincts kept him vigilant, and he began documenting these occurrences in preparation for any further confrontation. Reed's first move was to stage a raid on a local community center where Marcus and his allies frequently met. Under the pretense of a noise complaint, the officers barged in, their presence a clear attempt at intimidation. Marcus wasn't there, but Pastor Wright and several others stood firm, their calm defiance frustrating the officers. Videos of the raid spread online, drawing further outrage and strengthening the community's resolve. Inside the precinct, Daniels continued his quiet investigation, combing through files and surveillance footage. He found evidence of tampered reports and fabricated charges orchestrated by Trent and Reed. His hands trembled as he copied the files onto another flash drive, knowing this information could expose him to even greater danger. He considered reaching out to Carla but hesitated, unsure if he could fully trust anyone. Trent, aware that his grip on the precinct was slipping, reached out to his contact within the city's leadership. The official assured Trent of their support, promising to protect him as long as he kept the community's unrest under control. Trent felt a surge of relief but couldn't shake the feeling that his allies' loyalty was tenuous at best. Carla's investigation into Trent's connections bore fruit. She uncovered a series of payments and communications linking him to a prominent city council member known for opposing police reform. The evidence suggested that Trent had been acting as an enforcer for the council member's agenda, targeting activists and community leaders who pushed for accountability. Carla shared her findings with Marcus and Pastor Wright, their resolve hardening as the scope of the corruption became clear. Tensions reached a boiling point when Reed's harassment tactics escalated. Marcus returned home one evening to find his windows smashed and threatening messages spray-painted on his walls. He called Carla and Pastor Wright, their shared outrage fueling a renewed determination to fight back. They decided to organize a rally to demand Trent's resignation and an independent investigation into the precinct. The rally drew a massive crowd, their chants echoing through the streets. Marcus stood at the forefront, his presence a powerful symbol of resistance. Carla and Pastor Wright spoke passionately, their words urging the community to stand together. The energy was electric, but the tension was palpable. Marcus spotted Trent's officers in the distance, their faces unreadable as they observed the scene. As the rally continued, Reed and a group of officers moved in to disrupt the event. Their aggressive approach sparked chaos, but Marcus stepped forward, his calm authority diffusing the situation. He addressed the crowd, urging them to remain peaceful despite the provocation. His words carried weight, and the crowd's focus shifted back to their cause. Daniels, watching the rally from a distance, made his decision. He approached Carla after the event, handing her the flash drive with the additional evidence he'd uncovered. He spoke briefly, his voice heavy with the weight of his actions, before disappearing into the night. Carla, realizing the significance of the files, quickly reviewed them. The new evidence painted an even darker picture of Trent's operations, implicating him and his allies in a web of corruption that extended beyond the precinct. Trent's fury was uncontainable when he learned of Daniels' defection. He ordered his loyalists to find Daniels and silence him before he could do more damage. Reed, eager to redeem himself after the rally debacle, took charge of the hunt. Daniels, aware that he was now a target, stayed on the move, using his knowledge of the precinct's tactics to evade capture. The pressure mounted as Carla prepared to release her findings. She coordinated with national media outlets, ensuring that the story would reach as many people as possible. Marcus and Pastor Wright worked to maintain the community's morale, emphasizing the importance of their collective strength in the face of adversity. The stage was set for the next confrontation. Trent's desperation grew, his actions becoming more reckless as he struggled to retain control. The community's resilience only strengthened Marcus's resolve, and Carla's relentless pursuit of the truth continued to uncover new layers of corruption. The battle for justice was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The precinct buzzed with uneasy energy as the fallout from the rally spread. Trent's loyalists moved with purpose, their conversations clipped and tense. Reed, emboldened by Trent's orders, led the search for Daniels. He and a small group of officers scoured the city, their presence deliberate and intimidating. Reed's frustration grew with every dead end, his temper flaring as he barked orders to his team. Daniels remained a step ahead, his training and knowledge of police protocols giving him an edge. He moved cautiously, changing locations frequently and avoiding patterns. Each decision was calculated, every step a move in a dangerous game of survival. He kept his phone off, relying on payphones and public computers to communicate. The weight of his decision to defect pressed heavily on him, but he knew the evidence he'd handed to Carla was a necessary step toward justice. Carla worked tirelessly, analyzing the files Daniels had provided. The data revealed a deep network of corruption, implicating not just Trent and his officers but several high-ranking officials within the city. Each connection she uncovered fueled her determination, but the magnitude of the task was daunting. She knew she needed to act swiftly before the story could be suppressed. Trent convened his inner circle, their faces grim as he outlined their next steps. He instructed them to double their efforts to find Daniels, while simultaneously discrediting Carla. His plan included planting false evidence to undermine her credibility and using their media connections to control the narrative. Trent's desperation was palpable, his usual confidence replaced by a simmering rage. At the same time, Marcus and Pastor Wright continued their work within the community. They focused on maintaining morale and organizing further actions to demand accountability. Marcus's calm leadership inspired those around him, but the constant pressure of being in Trent's crosshairs weighed on him. He remained vigilant, aware that the next confrontation could come at any moment. The breaking point came when Reed and his team cornered Daniels in an abandoned warehouse. Daniels had chosen the location carefully, knowing it offered multiple escape routes. The confrontation was tense, both sides aware of the stakes. Reed taunted Daniels, his words dripping with disdain as he accused him of betrayal. Daniels remained calm, his gaze steady as he assessed his options. When Reed moved to close the distance, Daniels acted. His movements were precise and deliberate, a testament to his training. He disarmed one officer and used the distraction to create an opening. The ensuing scuffle was chaotic, but Daniels's strategic mind allowed him to outmaneuver his pursuers. He escaped into the night, leaving Reed fuming and humiliated. News of the confrontation reached Trent quickly. His anger boiled over as he berated Reed and the others for their failure. The pressure of the situation was beginning to fracture Trent's control, and his loyalists' confidence in him wavered. Reed's humiliation added fuel to the fire, his frustration with Trent's leadership growing. Carla's investigation reached a critical juncture as she prepared to release her findings. She coordinated with national media outlets, ensuring the story would gain widespread attention. The evidence Daniels had provided became the cornerstone of her report, a damning exposé of systemic corruption and abuse of power. Marcus and Pastor Wright lent their voices to the story, their perspectives adding depth and humanity to the narrative. Trent, realizing the walls were closing in, made a desperate move. He contacted his ally within the city's leadership, demanding assistance. The official, wary of the growing scrutiny, hesitated but ultimately agreed to provide resources to suppress the story. Trent's actions became increasingly reckless as he clung to the remnants of his power. The community's resolve only strengthened in response to Trent's tactics. Protests grew larger, their chants echoing through the city streets. Marcus's presence at the forefront of these demonstrations became a rallying point, his calm authority inspiring those around him. Carla's work brought national attention to their cause, amplifying their voices and drawing support from across the country. The final confrontation began to take shape as Trent's desperation led him to plan a direct attack on Marcus and his allies. He organized a raid on the community center, intending to arrest Marcus and disrupt their operations. Reed, eager to redeem himself, took charge of the operation, his determination blinding him to the consequences. The night of the raid was tense, the air charged with anticipation. Marcus, aware of the possibility of an attack, had prepared. He worked with Pastor Wright and others to secure the building and ensure the safety of those inside. When the officers arrived, the confrontation was immediate. Reed's voice boomed as he issued commands, his frustration evident. Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. He spoke calmly but firmly, challenging the officers' actions and pointing out their lack of justification. The tension was palpable as the two sides faced off, the crowd's energy simmering beneath the surface. Marcus's words resonated, their truth cutting through the chaos. The situation escalated when Reed lost his temper and moved to arrest Marcus. The crowd surged, their collective outrage pushing back against the officers. The chaos threatened to spiral out of control, but Marcus's voice cut through the noise. He urged the crowd to remain peaceful, his calm authority restoring a semblance of order. Daniels, who had been observing from the shadows, saw his opportunity. He stepped forward, his voice steady as he revealed his identity and the evidence he had gathered. The crowd's reaction was a mix of shock and support, their focus shifting to the revelations Daniels presented. Reed's composure faltered as Daniels's words dismantled the foundation of their operation. The raid ended in failure for Trent and his loyalists. The evidence Daniels and Carla had uncovered proved irrefutable, and the community's unity proved stronger than Trent's intimidation tactics. The fallout was swift, with calls for Trent's resignation and an independent investigation into the precinct gaining momentum. As the dust settled, Marcus, Carla, and Daniels regrouped, their resolve unshaken. They knew the fight was far from over, but the tide had turned in their favor. Together, they prepared for the next phase of their battle for justice, their determination unwavering in the face of adversity. The aftermath of the failed raid reverberated throughout the precinct and the community. Trent's anger was a palpable force, his frustration spilling over into every interaction. He convened his most loyal officers in a secluded room, their faces taut with unease. The failure of their operation had exposed weaknesses that Trent was determined to erase. Trent's orders were clear: they would double down on discrediting Marcus, Carla, and Daniels. His voice was sharp as he outlined their next steps, emphasizing the importance of maintaining control at all costs. Reed, still stinging from his public humiliation, volunteered to lead the charge. His resolve was bolstered by a mix of frustration and a desperate need to redeem himself in Trent's eyes. Meanwhile, Daniels found a moment of solace at a safe house arranged by Carla. The weight of his defection from the precinct pressed heavily on him, but he remained steadfast. He reviewed the files he had gathered, identifying patterns and connections that linked Trent's actions to higher authorities within the city. Each discovery reinforced his belief that exposing the corruption was worth the personal cost. Carla worked tirelessly to finalize her report. The data Daniels had provided painted a grim picture of systemic corruption, but the story needed a human element to drive its impact. She spent hours interviewing Marcus and other community members, their voices adding depth and urgency to the narrative. Carla's conviction was unwavering, even as threats and smear campaigns against her intensified. Marcus remained a steady presence, his leadership rallying the community despite the mounting pressure. He coordinated with Pastor Wright and other leaders, organizing peaceful demonstrations to maintain the momentum of their movement. The community's resilience became a powerful counterpoint to Trent's intimidation tactics, their unity a force that Trent struggled to suppress. Trent's next move was to deploy a smear campaign against Daniels. He leaked fabricated documents to the media, painting Daniels as a disgruntled officer with a history of misconduct. The headlines spread quickly, sowing doubt among those who had begun to trust Daniels. The plan was effective, but it also revealed Trent's desperation. Daniels, though shaken, resolved to continue his work, knowing the truth was on his side. Reed's role in the smear campaign was pivotal. He orchestrated a series of staged incidents designed to frame Marcus and his allies as agitators. These included planting evidence at demonstration sites and provoking confrontations to capture incriminating footage. The tactics were underhanded, but they provided Trent with the ammunition he needed to further his narrative. Carla countered the campaign with her own efforts. She released excerpts from her report to trusted journalists, ensuring the story's credibility remained intact. Her work drew national attention, amplifying the community's voice and increasing scrutiny on Trent and his loyalists. The media frenzy forced the city's leadership to address the growing crisis, though their responses were cautious and measured. Within the precinct, dissent simmered among the rank and file. Officers who had remained silent began to question Trent's leadership, their loyalty eroded by the mounting evidence of his corruption. Daniels' bravery inspired quiet conversations about accountability and reform. These murmurs of dissent planted seeds of doubt that Trent could no longer ignore. Trent's frustration boiled over during a late-night meeting with his ally in city leadership. The officials' tone was cautious, their support for Trent wavering in the face of public outcry. They warned Trent to resolve the situation quickly, hinting at the possibility of cutting ties if the scandal grew further. Trent's jaw tightened as he left the meeting, the cracks in his alliances threatening to shatter. The turning point came during a protest outside the precinct. The crowd was larger than ever, their chants echoing through the streets. Marcus stood at the forefront, his calm authority galvanizing the demonstrators. Carla documented the scene, her camera capturing the raw emotion and determination of the crowd. The tension escalated as Trent's officers formed a line, their expressions a mix of unease and determination. Reed, emboldened by Trent's orders, stepped forward to confront Marcus. His voice carried over the noise, accusing Marcus of inciting violence and disrupting public order. Marcus responded with measured words, his tone steady as he refuted Reed's claims. The crowd's energy shifted, their support for Marcus growing stronger in the face of Reed's aggression. The confrontation reached its peak when Reed attempted to arrest Marcus without cause. The crowd surged, their collective outrage pushing back against the officers. Marcus raised his hands, calling for calm even as the situation teetered on the edge of chaos. His restraint prevented the conflict from escalating further, his leadership a stark contrast to Reed's belligerence. Daniels, watching from the periphery, saw an opportunity. He stepped forward, his presence drawing attention from both sides. He addressed the crowd, his voice steady as he recounted his experiences within the precinct. Daniels' words carried weight, his insider perspective exposing the corruption that had fueled the conflict. The crowd's focus shifted, their anger directed squarely at Trent and his loyalists. Trent, observing from a distance, felt his grip slipping. He barked orders into his radio, demanding reinforcements to control the situation. But his commands were met with hesitation. The officers, now grappling with their own doubts, were reluctant to escalate the confrontation. Trent's frustration mounted as he realized the cracks within his ranks had widened. Carla captured every moment, her camera documenting the power dynamics at play. She knew the footage would be a crucial piece of her report, a visual testament to the community's resilience and the precinct's corruption. Her focus remained unshaken, even as the tension around her reached a fever pitch. The protest ended without violence, but the impact was undeniable. The community's unity had prevailed, their voices rising above Trent's attempts to silence them. Marcus, Carla, and Daniels regrouped, their determination renewed. They knew the fight was far from over, but they also knew they had turned a critical corner. As the night wore on, Trent retreated to his office, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He knew his next move would need to be decisive, a final effort to reclaim control. But for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. The community's strength, coupled with the cracks in his alliances, had shaken his confidence. Carla, back at her workspace, reviewed the day's footage. Her hands trembled with exhaustion, but her resolve remained firm. She began drafting the next installment of her report, her words fueled by the day's events. The narrative was shifting, and she was determined to see it through to the end. Daniels, sitting in the safe house, reflected on his journey. He had risked everything to expose the truth, and while the path forward was uncertain, he knew he couldn't turn back. His decision to stand with Marcus and Carla had cost him his career, but it had also given him a renewed sense of purpose. Marcus, preparing for the days ahead, remained focused on the fight. He knew Trent's desperation would only grow, but he also knew the community's strength would prevail. Together, they had weathered the storm, and together, they would see justice served. The precinct was a hive of tension and paranoia. Trent paced his office, his fists clenched at his sides. The weight of the protests, the mounting evidence, and the fractures within his own ranks threatened to unravel everything he had built. Reed stood across from him, his expression tight as he awaited instructions. Trent's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. They had to act decisively, and they had to act now. Reed nodded, eager to prove himself once more. He proposed a plan to bring Marcus, Carla, and Daniels down in one swift move. Trent listened, his eyes narrowing as he considered the risks. It was reckless, but the urgency of the situation left him no choice. He gave the order, his voice low and filled with resolve. This would be their final play. Carla, oblivious to the brewing storm, worked late into the night. Her report was nearly complete, each word a dagger aimed at the heart of the corruption she had uncovered. The evidence Daniels provided had tied everything together, creating a narrative so damning that it could not be ignored. She knew the risks of publishing it, but she also knew the power of the truth. She paused only to answer a call from Marcus, who updated her on the community's preparations for the next protest. His voice was calm, but she could sense the strain beneath it. Daniels, hiding in the shadows, monitored Trent's movements through trusted contacts. He knew the precinct's tactics well and anticipated their next move. When word reached him of an impending raid, his pulse quickened. He contacted Carla and Marcus, warning them of the danger. His voice was steady, but urgency laced every word. They had to be ready. Marcus immediately called a meeting with Pastor Wright and the other community leaders. They gathered in the basement of a local church, their faces set with determination. Marcus outlined a plan to protect the community and ensure the protest continued as planned. Pastor Wright's voice filled the room, rallying their spirits with words of hope and resilience. The room buzzed with energy as they prepared for the confrontation they knew was coming. Trent's forces moved under the cover of darkness. Reed led the operation, his every move calculated to instill fear. They targeted the church, surrounding it with vehicles and officers. The sight of the uniformed men stirred whispers among the community members who had gathered outside. Reed's voice boomed as he issued orders, demanding that Marcus and the leaders come out. Inside, Marcus and the others stood their ground. Pastor Wright stepped forward, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the officers. He pointed out the lack of justification for their actions, his words carrying the weight of moral authority. Reed sneered, his patience wearing thin. He ordered his officers to advance, but the community members formed a human barrier, their hands raised in peaceful protest. The tension reached a boiling point when Trent arrived. He stepped out of his vehicle, his presence commanding attention. He locked eyes with Marcus, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. Trent spoke, his words sharp as he accused Marcus of inciting chaos and endangering the city. Marcus's response was measured, his tone unyielding as he refuted the claims. The exchange was a battle of wills, each man standing firm in his conviction. Carla arrived on the scene, her camera capturing every moment. She moved through the crowd, documenting the standoff with a steady hand. Her presence added a new layer of accountability, her reputation as a journalist giving the community's struggle a voice that could not be silenced. She knew the footage would be critical, not just for her report but for the movement as a whole. Daniels, watching from the shadows, saw his moment. He stepped forward, his presence drawing gasps from the crowd. His voice carried over the noise as he addressed Trent directly. Daniels laid out the evidence he had gathered, each revelation striking a blow to Trent's crumbling authority. The crowd's reaction was immediate, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage. Trent's composure cracked. He barked orders at his officers, but their hesitation was palpable. The fractures within the precinct had grown too wide to ignore, and many of the officers refused to act. Reed, sensing the shift, tried to rally them, but his efforts fell flat. The tide had turned. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. He called for calm, urging the crowd to channel their anger into action rather than violence. His words carried the weight of a leader who had earned their trust, and the crowd listened. The tension eased, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Carla's camera captured Trent's defeat in real time. His once commanding presence was reduced to a man grasping at the last remnants of his power. He retreated to his vehicle, his face pale and his eyes hollow. The crowd's cheers rang out as he drove away, their victory a testament to their unity and resilience. The aftermath of the confrontation was swift and decisive. Carla published her report, its impact rippling across the nation. The evidence Daniels provided became the cornerstone of multiple investigations, leading to arrests and resignations at every level. The community's protests gained even more traction, their voices amplified by the media coverage. Marcus, Carla, and Daniels stood together as the movement continued to grow. They knew the fight was far from over, but they also knew they had achieved something remarkable. Their efforts had exposed the truth, and their unity had proven stronger than the forces that sought to silence them. As they looked out at the crowd, their resolve was unshaken. The battle for justice was just beginning, and they were ready to see it through to the end.